Hi, this is Gene Ransom. With MedChi, the Maryland State Medical Society. I am doing a quick video short on tort and immunity issues for Maryland physicians during the COVID-19 pandemic. I've had quite a few questions about this, and I want to say first and foremost, this is not legal advice. This is purely for information purposes only. And again, if you have legal questions around tort or malpractice, you should talk to your attorney or your malpractice broker. But again, this is for informational purposes only. So I'm going to start with the provisions that are in place in Maryland. First, Maryland has had for quite some time a Good Samaritan Law, Maryland Code 5-603, which essentially protects you when you're doing some type of assistance or medical care without fee or compensation. This is the classic example of the car accident. You're driving down the road, you pull over, and even though you're a pathologist, you get out of the car and you provide first aid, and you're not charging a fee or anything. The Good Samaritan Law will protect you from being sued for malpractice. So if you find yourself in the role of a Good Samaritan during this time of crisis, you're not accepting a fee, this act might apply to you. Obviously, that's a really small shot that that's going to happen. And again, this does not protect if you do something willfully wrong or you're acting in gross negligence. This is a qualified immunity. So you don't have a lot of protection there, but you do have a level of protection. It's nice to know that Maryland has a Good Samaritan Law. The Federal CARES Act, Section 3215, passed additional protections very similar to the Good Samaritan Law, which expands it a little bit. This is a federal act. Essentially, if you're working in one of those volunteer situations, you sign up for the Maryland Volunteer Corps, you go and you volunteer and work for free at the convention center, and you're helping treat COVID-19 patients, you have additional levels of protections here, a little above and beyond, but again, very similar to the Good Samaritan protections, and again, limited by the same thing. You can't collect a fee under this. You've got to be acting as a reasonably prudent healthcare practitioner would act. No criminal misconduct, no gross negligence, no reckless behavior. So again, a little more protection or similar protection, but still a lot of loose ends. So you might go, oh my goodness, that's scary, because obviously these are difficult times and different times. But there is actually another statute we have in Maryland called the Public Safety Immunity Act. This was passed shortly after 9/11, Maryland Code 143A 10B. And what it says is that when a healthcare practitioner is acting in good faith under a catastrophic health emergency proclamation, they get additional immunities and protections for treating people related to that catastrophe. Governor Hogan's issued such a proclamation. He did that on March 5th. So if you're providing care to a COVID-19 patient, even if you're getting paid, this does not have the pay provision, you might have a pretty high level of immunity under this statute. Now, if you're treating a COVID-19 patient for something other than COVID, you might not have protection. You can make that argument either way, and that's a little bit of a gray area. Now, however, you might be going, well, wait a second, my world is really different. I'm doing a lot of telemedicine, things have changed. What happens to my other patients or these other scenarios? Well, the statute also says that if you are providing care within the scope of an emergency order or a directive by the Department of Health or the governor, then that also protects you. So one could make an argument that if you're not providing care because of the elective surgery directive or the non-urgent care directive that came out on March 23rd, or any of the other orders or directives, and your decisions are based on those orders or those directives, that might give you a level of protection. Again, there's a lot of unclarity here. There's terms like good faith in the statute under Section B. So I think this is one where we have asked, MedChi and others have asked for additional clarification on this and what it would mean. We've also asked for additional executive orders from the governor that are under consideration to strengthen the tort protections and criminal protections to the extent available under the Maryland Constitution. Unfortunately, there might be some limitations on how far the governor can go. We do think clarification, though, on what's covered and what isn't under this Public Safety Immunity Act could be very helpful. So that's a summary of the protections that are in place in Maryland. I do want to touch base on one other quick point while we're going through this issue, and that is that If you're doing telehealth, it's really important to understand that the patient law that applies to the patient is where the patient is. So if the patient's in Florida, you need to know what Florida law is, not what Maryland law is, for example. And it's also important to know that malpractice carriers may or may not cover you. There have been a lot of loosening of rules around telehealth, and you do telehealth in a lot of places you couldn't do otherwise, but you still should check with your medical malpractice carrier. For example, MedMutual has graciously said that if you're doing telehealth for a patient in Maryland, Virginia, or DC, you're covered, but they're not covering other states. And different carriers are having different rules. So you just need to check and know what the rules are and understand whether you're covered, because that's an important issue. And the immunity provisions that I just went through would not apply in another state, obviously. Each states have different rules and different laws. So again, this was not meant for legal advice, just for information. I know we've had a lot of my docs asking questions about this, so I thought it would be helpful to kind of go through it. As always, if you need additional information or you want to see the letter that MedKai wrote with about 40 other organizations asking for additional protections, you can go to www.medkai.org. Thanks for watching.